Hi, it's Catherine Franke. It's April 29th, and yesterday President Trump issued several executive orders. There's one I want to draw our attention to in particular because I think what it's doing is putting into place some of the pieces that the president might want to use later if he were inclined to declare martial law and aggressively police protests as he's ratcheting up his policies and we come to the streets to protest them. This particular executive order is called Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement to Pursue Criminals and Protect Innocent Citizens. So what the executive order does is bring a whole lot of resources, legal indemnity, legal resources, etc., to local law enforcement, domestic law enforcement capacity. Two things I want to highlight. One is Section 2, which says that the U.S. government is going to commit itself through the Attorney General to the expanded indemnification of police departments and policing. Two parts of that. One is that they're going to commit resources to defending police departments and individual police officers. And I think what's going on here is that basically Trump extorted hundreds of millions of dollars of free legal labor from huge law firms recently. And he's going to call on that promise, that agreement, and have law firms defend police departments and police officers, make sure they're there as their good lawyers when they commit unconstitutional and otherwise illegal acts. Another part of this is a call to Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, to basically walk away from consent decrees that have been entered into over many, many years across the country with police departments where they've been found to have been engaging in unconstitutional and illegal acts, largely discriminatory, excessive force, those kinds of things. Policing black people more than other people, tasing, shooting without any justification or probable cause, citizens and others. The executive order calls for the Attorney General to agree to walk away from those agreements. So this gives basically a hall pass to police departments. Do what you want. You don't have any oversight anymore. We're not going to enforce the Constitution relative to what you're up to. That is worrisome. It should worry all of us. But the second piece, big piece, is Section 4, where the president says we're going to bring many, many more federal resources and assets to domestic law enforcement efforts of basic criminal activity, or what they would declare as criminal activity. Now, there's a law that was passed in 1878, the Posse Comitatus Act. And what that law says is that the U.S. military may not be used to do domestic law enforcement actions. Can't be used as cops, domestic cops. Why? In 1878, there was a worry that the federal military would be used to enforce the new form of slavery in the South, Jim Crow segregation. And the Congress wanted to be sure that the federal military, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the force, would not be used to enforce Jim Crow segregation. And there are a few exceptions to the Posse Comitatus Act, but the executive order issued yesterday does not reference any of them. It merely says that federal assets, military assets that are available through the Department of Defense should be brought to bear to do domestic law enforcement activities. This just completely and facially violates the Posse Comitatus Act. So there's two things that we ought to worry about going forward after this executive order. One is that the U.S. military may be appearing on our streets in response to protests or the enforcement of or misenforcement of immigration laws in ways that violate the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. The second is that the Trump administration may start mobilizing the National Guard. And now the National Guard is a body of military officers, all of which are within each state reportable to the governor of that state, not to the President of the United States as the commander-in-chief, but the governor is the commander-in-chief, if you will, of National Guards. And those National Guards normally cannot be mobilized without the consent and the involvement of the governor, or in this case of the District of Columbia, the mayor. Now, we saw in 2020 that Trump mobilized or federalized, if you will, the National Guard in the District of Columbia over the objections of the mayor of the District of Columbia because of the unique legal identity of the District of Columbia, which basically is a subsidiary of the national federal government. And those National Guard troops in D.C. were used to quell Black Lives Matter protests protesting the murder of George Floyd. But what Trump also did at that time is go to sympathetic governors across the country, governors that were in political alignment with him, and there were 11 of them, to say, send your National Guard troops as well. Now, that is very out of order. But what they did is a kind of workaround of the way that the National Guard normally works, is that those troops from states that were red states, that were Trump states or MAGA states, is that those troops reported to the D.C. National Guard chain of command, which ultimately ended with President Trump because of the unique status of the District of Columbia. So we need to worry that this will expand. Not only will the federal military be mobilized, but that in states that have Trump supporting governors, and there are a number of them, that they will allow their National Guard troops to report to the District of Columbia National Guard in terms of chain of command, but show up in states like New York, Connecticut, Illinois, California, states that have Democratic governors. And part of the concern here is that through this workaround, the Trump administration will use those Democratic governors as fig leaves, or basically move them aside by having collaborating governors in Republican states who are allowing their troops to be nationalized, not just in the District of Columbia, but in other states in the Union. We'll see if that happens, but it is a possibility given how these people are thinking creatively, and they're building on what they learned, lessons learned from the last administration. So if you are concerned about this, of having the National Guard troops from another hostile state, if you might say, show up in your state if you live in California or New York or Illinois or Minnesota, or, like the list goes on, mobilize your governor, your attorney general, your legislature to say, we will not consent to having National Guard troops from another state show up in our state to quell protests. We need to get ahead of this. And part of doing that is legal, but a lot of doing it is political. We need to call it out before it happens, and call out its unconstitutionality before it happens, and get your powerful elected officials to back you up. That's why going to the governor, attorney general, and legislators is critically important. Okay, that's it for today, other than to say, go Cubs.